US President Donald Trump says Tehran's key nuclear sites have been, quote, completely obliterated after American fighter planes bombed 3 facilities in Iran. Speaking from the White House on Saturday night, President Trump said the Natanz, Isfahan and the Fordo facilities have been destroyed. The president explicitly thanked the US Air Force personnel involved in the attack. Trump went on to threaten Iran with even more strikes if Tehran decides to retaliate against the US, saying Iran has the choice between peace or tragedy. The US president also explained why the US was joining Israel's war on Iran.
Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
For more now, I'm joined by DW Washington correspondent Misha Komadovsky. Misha, thanks for being here. We've just heard from President Trump there. What do you take away from it?
We've just heard from President Trump at the White House, as we saw standing alongside Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, and Secretary of Defense Hegseth. He has now clarified the recent speculation stirred by his earlier tweets in which he called for what he described as an unconditional surrender. Now he laid out 2 stark options, saying, and I quote here, there will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran, far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. President Trump says the U.S. military strikes have totally obliterated 3 major Iranian nuclear facilities. He said the goal was to eliminate the nuclear threat posed by Iran, a country he called a bully of the Middle East, and he praised the close coordination with Israel, highlighting Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli military, and credited the U.S. armed forces for what he described as an unprecedented operation. He also announced that the Secretary of Defense would give a follow-up press briefing at the Pentagon next morning. Notably, the White House press corps was not present for this address, a break from a long tradition that denied reporters the chance to ask follow-up questions. I can speak from personal experience here. In the past, the White House would typically notify us within an hour to assemble for major remarks like this. As today's in-town print pooler noted, he checked with the White House staff to see if he was needed back on campus. He was told he wasn't. And with no press present tonight, attention now turns to tomorrow's Pentagon briefing, where officials may face pressure to clarify the scope, the strategy, and the potential consequences of this operation.
Now, a top Democrat has criticized Trump's move, saying President Trump, and I'm quoting here, President Trump misled the country about his intentions. He, of course, ran his campaign on a rhetoric of ending wars. How have other people been reacting?
Well, indeed, President Trump once promised to keep the U.S. out of foreign wars, and he has now chosen, as we see, a different path to enter a conflict that could put American troops in danger. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said President Trump misled the public, ignored Congress, and is pushing the U.S. closer to a wider war in the Middle East. Previously, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, and other Senate GOP leaders endorsed the strikes, describing them as decisive actions to protect U.S. interests and allies. Senator Tim Kaine and Senator Bernie Sanders have introduced measures to restrict further U.S. military action without congressional approval. And notably, lawmakers from both parties had already been working to stop President Trump from using military force without first getting approval from them. And according to our source in the U.S. administration, the president and his national security team have planned for every possible Iranian retaliation. At least that's what our sources say. Now they are focused on protecting U.S. military assets in the region. Now, Congress usually approves formal wars and authorizes longer conflicts, while the president can launch short-term strikes, but is supposed to consult Congress for anything bigger or anything longer. Over the decades, there's been a gray zone. In the past, we've seen U.S. presidents from both parties launching military actions without congressional approval, citing here either self-defense or emergency response.
That's DW correspondent Misha Komadovsky in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We can now speak to Behnam Taleblu. He's a senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He joins us now also from Washington, D.C. Behnam, thanks for being here. Reuters news agency is reporting that Iran's state TV said every American citizen or military in the region is now a legitimate target. Do we have any confirmation on this, and what does it mean?
Great to be with you. No official confirmation other than it has already been broadcast on Iranian state TV, and it pairs with what you've seen a whole host of officials prior to and regime media outlets prior to Israel and prior to America's strike on these three nuclear facilities. Meaning the Islamic Republic was long dangling the threat of a wider war, particularly a war that could either go after U.S. bases or the rest of its military footprint in the Middle East as a way to prevent those strikes. Now that those strikes have taken place, and those three, per Donald Trump, have been either severely damaged or destroyed, then the onus will be on the Islamic Republic. Will it choose to escalate? And then externally, will it escalate in a way that is publicly observable and tries to save face without losing its head? Because Donald Trump has also recently shared on his social media account that if Iran responds, the U.S. would respond.
How long can Iran hold out military confrontation with Israel and now possibly the U.S.?
Well, the Iranians are already in a wider missile war with the Israelis. Between 420 and 480 medium-range ballistic missiles have been fired by the Islamic Republic at Israeli territory in response to Israel's stunning intelligence and military success that began about a week ago on Iranian territory, going after missiles, nuclear scientists, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps senior commanders, and other military targets. The regime still, despite losing large stocks of its missiles, is still firing them. How they decide to layer these in potential attacks against U.S. targets remains to be seen. They could perhaps turn on their proxy forces in Iraq, as well as in Yemen, which have been less militarily beaten by the Israelis compared to other forces in Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. But make no mistake, the Islamic Republic was already conventionally outgunned against Israel, and now with a potential American entry into a wider military conflict, things from a military perspective will not be looking good for them if they respond.
With all of these recent developments in the last hours, do any diplomatic options still exist that could drive Iran and the U.S. back to talks rather than deeper confrontation?
Certainly, based both on what has been reported, meaning that the president has reportedly sent a letter or a private communique to the government of the Islamic Republic saying that these were counter-proliferation strikes, not regime change or decapitation strikes. Donald Trump publicly at least twice has said that he is the one who has prevented the Israelis thus far from targeting the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, an 86-year-old clerical leader believed to be in a bunker somewhere on Iranian territory still. And of course, that even in the strike, in the tweet or in the social media post announcing these strikes, President Trump still did offer a diplomatic off-ramp. There's a lot of talk about the president being like a deal maker or, trying to cultivate uncertainty, but sometimes the president simply has been saying what he wants. And what he's wanted all along is a nuclear deal.
That's Behnam Taleblu. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, Israel's Prime Minister Bejamin Netanyahu has been urging Washington to get involved in the conflict with Iran. Shortly after the news of the strike broke, Netanyahu praised the U.S. military and the U.S. president, saying the move would change the course of history.
It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength.
We're now joined by DW correspondent Tania Krämer in Tel Aviv. Welcome, Tania. We've just heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu there. How are people in Israel reacting to this?
Well, I mean, still early morning here, local time in Israel, and people are just waking up to the news. Actually, there has been no alarm, no sirens overnight, so maybe it was a night where people actually could sleep. But I mean, we heard President Trump saying that the nuclear sites were obliterated. Then we had now already an address in English but also in Hebrew by Prime Minister Bejamin Netanyahu saying this will completely change history. He also reiterated this idea of shaping the Middle East and also of peace through strength. But of course, the questions that are being asked here in the past days, and we knew that the US will join into this Israeli operation, is what will happen next? How will Iran now react to this? And I think this is very much on people's minds now that they're waking up to this news.
Mm-hmm. And as they wake up, Israel has increased the alert level nationwide. Have authorities said more about what Israelis should expect in the next hours?
Well, it had been on a really high level then for the past days and, decreased a bit, and now they set it up again. Tonight there was the message by the Home Front Command that all from limited activity goes now back to essential activities, that we had that also at the beginning of this war in this attack on Iran. So basically that means, only essential workplaces, for example, should be opening today. People have to be really aware, have to be very close to shelter. That's what they have been in any case. So what could happen here is, more ballistic missile attacks that we could see, but we could also see in the region, obviously, that Iran might retaliate against military bases, U.S. military bases in the region, military assets in the region. There's also talk about that Iran could block the Strait of Hormuz, which would then, of course, see a global effect on this. So all of this is not quite clear. We are just now in the early hours after these U.S. strikes, and we have to wait and see now what the next steps are being taken by Iran.
There were reports earlier that Israel had been notified in advance by the US about the strikes on Iran. Have you heard of any confirmation from your sources?
We haven't gotten any confirmation on that so far as I understand, but there have been phone calls made between Prime Minister Bejamin Netanyahu and US President Trump. They have been in really close contact, as far as we understand, in recent days. I mean, to the point that there was not a very public push for it, but this is exactly what happened tonight. This scenario, of course, what the Israelis wanted to see from the United States. I mean, it's a very, very significant development. That's probably an understatement here in the region. So we now have to wait and see how Iran will react to that.
That's DW correspondent Tania Krämer in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much.